processed quickly in a detention centre in Kent. We are talking about people being dispersed into communities, into migrant hotels from which they abscond, from which they work illegally, and we know that this is absolutely on an industrial scale.
Keir Starmer just faced one of the most humiliating moments of his career in Parliament. Nigel Farage didn't hold back, tearing into him over his failure to act on critical issues like illegal immigration and public safety, leaving Starmer speechless and exposed. With the nation still in shock from the brutal Southport stabbings, Starmer's response has been seen as weak, robotic, and out of touch. Could this be the final blow that pushes him to quit?
Worse at a faster rate.
I am sure you have big plans for Reform UK. At a huge conference, Nigel Farage gave, even the most cynical person would say that Nigel Farage gave an absolutely barnstorming speech at that conference in Birmingham. You had thousands of people.
Nigel Farage didn't hold back when it came to tearing into Keir Starmer's leadership in Parliament. During a fiery speech, Farage laid out a brutal critique of Starmer's silence and inaction on key issues that have been weighing heavily on the minds of the British public. One of the biggest areas Farage focused on was illegal immigration. According to Farage, Starmer has been nothing short of passive, allowing waves of illegal immigrants to enter the UK without any meaningful action to stop it. Farage pointed out how the Labour government's lack of response has not only increased public fear, but also contributed to a growing sense of societal decay.
We both know Nigel has universal support, our members. We could run a direct democratic vote every single day and he'd come up with around about 100%. We both know that. But look, in terms of what Reform are doing, we are professionalising the party.
Farage also highlighted how Starmer's inability to act has led to a decline in public safety across the country. He specifically called out Starmer's government for failing to address the rise in street violence and criminal activities. According to Farage, this inability to implement effective policies has allowed the public to lose trust in the government. Farage believes Starmer's leadership is failing to keep people safe, leaving a dangerous void in the country's security structure. Farage's frustration was palpable, especially when he spoke about how the UK's border control policies have been ineffective, allowing organised smuggling rings to thrive while Starmer turns a blind eye. One moment that exposed Starmer's vulnerabilities was Farage's mention of the tragic stabbings in Southport, a heartbreaking incident that shook the nation. Farage made it clear that he believes Starmer's response to the tragedy was woefully inadequate. Instead of stepping up and offering a clear plan to prevent such events in the future, Starmer, according to Farage, did what he does best: delivered empty promises with no concrete action. The public was looking for leadership, and Farage argued that Starmer simply wasn't up to the task. Farage suggested that Starmer's lacklustre response to these urgent issues is one of the biggest reasons why people are losing faith in him as a leader. To Farage, it's not just about what Starmer says, it's about his failure to act when it matters most. And in Farage's eyes, Starmer's silence on critical issues like immigration and public safety is unforgivable.
Were killed and all those people injured at a Taylor Swift dance class. I mean, it's so...
beggars belief.
It's just so devastating, the entire story. Now, what happened last night, let's not...
The tragic events that unfolded in Southport shocked the entire nation. On what should have been a normal day, a horrific knife attack claimed the lives of 3 innocent young girls, leaving a community devastated. The attacker, Axel Rudakabana, brutally murdered the girls in broad daylight, turning what started as a normal day into one of horror and unimaginable grief. The incident occurred during a Taylor Swift-themed dance class, of all places, a space meant to bring joy, not violence. The nation was left reeling, and the tragedy quickly became a flashpoint for concerns about public safety and the government's failure to adequately protect its citizens.
To be fair to the government, it does put out the figures very efficiently. And there was a sort of strange 4-day period where nobody came across. Anyway, here we go. Saturday.
In the aftermath of the Southport tragedy, the government, and particularly Keir Starmer, faced intense criticism for not doing enough to prevent such heinous crimes. Many people looked to Starmer for leadership during this time of crisis, but instead, his response was widely perceived as robotic and unempathetic. When Starmer addressed the nation, he relied heavily on a scripted speech, looking down at his notes almost every few seconds. This lack of genuine emotion and connection with the public did not sit well with those who were grieving or those who wanted to see real change. Starmer's words came across as hollow, and his inability to speak from the heart left people questioning whether he truly understood the gravity of the situation. Nigel Farage was one of the most vocal critics of Starmer's handling of the Southport tragedy. In his speech, Farage condemned Starmer for what he saw as a total failure to address the public's concerns about safety. According to Farage, the tragedy was a direct result of Labour's weak policies and failure to tackle the root causes of crime. He pointed out that while Starmer promised change, his government had done little to implement meaningful solutions that could have prevented such a horrific act of violence. Farage also called out the hypocrisy in Starmer's approach, noting that he often speaks of restoring peace and stability, but has done little to make that a reality.
A huge problem now, is it? But I wonder, can Labour stop this? Because you see, I don't think we can unless we get back to where we were under the last Labour government.
Nigel Farage wasted no time ripping into Keir Starmer's handling of immigration, and one of the biggest targets of his critique was Starmer's decision to scrap the Rwanda deportation scheme. The scheme, introduced by the Conservatives, was designed to deter illegal immigration by relocating those who entered the UK through dangerous and unlawful means to Rwanda, where their asylum claims would be processed. Starmer's Labour government, however, decided to abandon the plan, and according to Farage, that was a colossal mistake. Farage saw this move as a signal to smugglers and illegal migrants that the UK had no solid deterrent in place anymore, leading to a surge in illegal entries across the English Channel. What made things worse was the lack of a clear alternative to the Rwanda scheme. Starmer's government ended the Conservative policy without putting anything substantial in its place, leaving the country vulnerable to rising illegal immigration. This backfired almost immediately, as numbers of illegal crossings shot up, further fueling public frustration. Farage wasn't shy about pointing this out, emphasising that Starmer's decision to scrap the scheme had left the UK without a plan to deal with the growing immigration crisis. Farage was particularly vocal about how this decision reflected Starmer's broader failure to manage one of the most pressing issues the country faces.
Crossings. But Nigel, this is day 53 of this Labour government. Yes. It took the Tories 14 years to triple net migration. It is going to take time to bring it down. But part of the way we tackle it is much stronger cooperation with our partners in the European Union. It's getting returns agreements with the European Union. It's intelligence sharing and police cooperation.
Farage also raised the alarm on national security, arguing that the influx of undocumented migrants posed a serious risk. He pointed out that many of these individuals arrive with little to no vetting, raising concerns about who is entering the country. Farage went so far as to accuse the French Navy of escorting illegal immigrants across the Channel, handing them off to the UK's border force, which further exposed the weak control Britain had over its borders. Farage framed this as not only a policy failure, but also a looming national security disaster. His claims about the alleged handoff between the French Navy and UK authorities underscored his belief that Starmer's leadership is dangerously ineffective, leaving the country open to potential threats. For Farage, Starmer's misstep on immigration isn't just a political blunder. It's a failure that endangers the entire nation.
His parents and family, of course, continue to experience deep grief and distress. A year ago, Sergeant Martin Blake was charged with murder, and on Monday, the jury returned their verdict, and Sergeant Blake was acquitted.
Keir Starmer has faced heavy criticism for his immigration policies, and Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has also found herself in the hot seat. Cooper has been at the forefront of Labour's efforts to manage the immigration crisis, but her approach has been met with widespread scepticism. One of her key proposals was the ambitious plan to deport 14,000 illegal immigrants within 6 months. On paper, this might have sounded like a bold, decisive move, but Farage was quick to tear it apart. He described the plan as dumb and unrealistic, pointing out that Labour had no concrete strategy to achieve such a lofty goal.
It is imperative that the jury's verdict is respected and that Sergeant Blake and his family are given the time and space that they will need to recover from what will have been an immensely difficult experience for them.
Farage wasn't alone in questioning the feasibility of Cooper's proposal. Many experts have pointed out that deporting many people in such a short time would require an immense logistical effort, not to mention the legal hurdles involved. It's not just a matter of putting people on planes. Each deportation would have to go through a legal process, making the timeline virtually impossible. Farage argued that Cooper's plan was nothing more than an attempt to silence critics who have been increasingly vocal about Labour's failure to tackle illegal immigration. In his view, this kind of political posturing only highlights the deeper issues within the party's approach to immigration. What made Farage's criticism sting even more was Cooper's history of being highly vocal about the Conservative government's shortcomings in handling immigration. Back when the Conservatives were in power, Cooper didn't hold back in criticising their efforts, frequently lambasting them for not doing enough to stem the flow of illegal immigrants. Yet now, with Labour in control, Cooper has found herself facing the same scrutiny for failing to deliver on her promises. Farage capitalised on this, pointing out the hypocrisy in Cooper's past statements compared to her current performance. Nigel Farage has been sounding the alarm for years about the growing national security crisis caused by unchecked immigration, and recent events have only made his concerns seem more urgent. According to Farage, the increasing number of illegal immigrants arriving in the UK presents a serious security threat, one that is being ignored by Keir Starmer and his government. Farage has always been vocal about the risk of potential terrorist infiltration, especially from groups like ISIS, who have previously used migration routes to smuggle operatives into Europe. He argues that by allowing undocumented individuals to enter the country without thorough vetting, the government is putting British citizens at serious risk.
14.1% of the vote that we won in the general election, the 4 million vote, came with Nigel Farage as leader for a matter of weeks. It came with virtually no ground campaign at all, other than in 4 of the 5 seats.
Back in 2015, ISIS openly boasted that they would use the Mediterranean to send their operatives into Europe, and Farage has never forgotten that warning. He believes the UK government failed to take that threat seriously, and now the country is paying the price. Farage's use of the term invasion to describe the waves of illegal migrants crossing the Channel was initially met with backlash, with many accusing him of fear-mongering. However, as the situation has worsened, with migrant numbers continuing to rise and no clear plan in place to stop them, people are beginning to see things differently. What once seemed like alarmist rhetoric now feels like a stark warning that the UK ignored at its peril. Farage is adamant that a tougher stance on immigration is necessary to protect national security. He believes that by allowing these unchecked flows of people, the UK is creating the perfect conditions for terrorists to enter the country unnoticed. For him, the government's failure to address this issue head-on is nothing short of negligence. He's been particularly critical of Keir Starmer, whom he sees as weak and indecisive on immigration policy. According to Farage, Starmer's government has no real plan to address the security risks posed by illegal immigration, leaving the country vulnerable to both criminal elements and potential terrorist threats. Farage's call for stronger border controls and stricter immigration policies is not just about political ideology. In his view, it's about protecting the country from imminent danger. In his mind, Starmer simply isn't fit to lead the UK through this growing crisis, and without decisive action, the security situation will only get worse. Following the tragic Southport stabbings, Keir Starmer had a chance to step up and show the nation that he was capable of leading during a time of crisis. Unfortunately, his response did the opposite. In the aftermath of such a horrific event, people expected a strong, compassionate leader to provide comfort and reassurance. What they got instead was a stilted, robotic performance that felt completely disconnected from the grief and shock the nation was experiencing. During his 9-minute speech, Starmer repeatedly glanced down at his notes, almost as if he couldn't remember what to say next. For many, this lack of spontaneity and emotion was deeply off-putting.